Hello everyone, my name is Tiane. I'm a project coordinator with Anamatangi Polynesian Voices, and today we'll be doing our first ever series with environmental justice, and today I have a special guest.
Hi, Tau Falava. My name is Saena, and I'm the founder and executive director of Climate Resilient Communities.
Where are you from and what do you do?
I am originally from Samoa. I'm from the villages of Toia, Tautuuta, Sorosolo, Falealili, Samakau. I'm an environmentalist.
Okay. What environmental justice or issues are going on there in Samoa?
Samoa is vulnerable to sea level rise and climate change, so any extreme events. Samoa is vulnerable because we are a country that depend heavily on natural resources, so our ocean, our people we fish, not only for our livelihoods, but also for food. It's the same thing with the land. We work the land for our livelihoods as well as for our families. And so when natural disasters occur, like flooding, we've been hit by really major floods that I've never seen before. And that's all due to climate change. Also vulnerable to cyclones, hurricanes. And when these events occur for Samoa as an island, because we're small and we depend very much on our resources, a lot of these resources are being wiped out. So most of the time we have to start from the beginning to try and work the land again for our livelihood.
How do these vulnerabilities connect to the work you do here in the States?
The impacts of climate change to communities here are very similar to communities back home. So there's a lot of similarities. And the similarities comes from the existing adaptive capacity of families, or you say here residents, or I would say, communities or villages in Samoa. The adaptive capacity to respond or to plan for. And that's what makes us very vulnerable, because many times I have observed that many of our families, especially that we worry about, for example here, paying the rent. We have to work to, almost like work to survive. And so we don't have the resources to plan for flooding, right? Sometimes people are not aware how vulnerable they are or how that will impact their family's health and also family's livelihood. So we don't pay attention unless something happens and then it hits us. And so a lot of the work I'm doing, so it's the same thing back in Samoa as well. Like we work every day, we don't really have enough to put aside for rainy days, right? So if your house is blown down by a cyclone, you don't really have money to rebuild. Most of the times back home, we depend on our families living overseas, like here in the States. So we send remittances back home, and that's how we start building up again. But here, it's the same situation where many families work 2-3 jobs. The parents are just try to pay our rent because the cost of living is very high. And so that doesn't leave any of the under-resourced communities resources to plan for.
Google knows you as an international climate change expert. How did your journey of becoming an international climate change expert start?
Interesting. I think my expertise is around planning for climate change. So I started working on climate change issues right after college or right after university, and that was back in 1998 when I first got my first job working for the government of Samoa. And I was Samoa's first climate change officer too. So a lot of the work that I did for my home country was building the foundation for climate change work. And a lot of it at the time when I started working, the projects that I was working on is to help Samoa meet its obligation to the United Nations. So the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that Samoa signed in 1992, and so an obligation under the convention is for Samoa as a country to communicate to the United Nations of our emissions. So that's where I first worked on a project that completed Samoa's first greenhouse gas inventory and a report to the UN, like how much is Samoa emitting to the atmosphere, so to assess how much we are contributing to the causes of climate change. And at that time, our emission was less than 1%, very insignificant compared to the rest of developed countries like here in the United States. So that was one report. The second report was to communicate to the UN how vulnerable Samoa is to the impacts of climate change. So I also worked on the project where we completed that report and that study, and so we submitted our first initial communication to the UN under my leadership. So a lot of the work, not only that, but also building relationship with other countries. So at the UN level, when you are attending meetings, I'm always like, the voice of like small island developing states. So this is like SIDS. This is another group of countries are defined by our size. Like that's what I call small island developing states or island, like the nature of who we are. And then there's also Alliance of Small Islands, which is AOSIS, and then Samoa was also at the time an LDC country, which means the poorest country. That's how United Nations categorize countries by their wealth. But a lot of it comes down to me advocating for funding and resources to help small countries to build up our resilience to the impacts of climate change.
Can you share an experience during your time working in less developing countries that was the most impactful to our most vulnerable communities to climate change?
Yeah, so I'm going to say an example in Samoa, right? Because at the time Samoa was an LDC country or least developed country, and the time, the narrative, or I was always advocating for funding to come to Samoa. So at the negotiation level, I was involved in the negotiations where we actually included in the article, I think Article 4.1, which immediately gave LDCs funding to create their NAPAs. So NAPAs are National Adaptation Program of Actions, right? It's a report, and it's also like a policy strategy where each LDC country will go back to their country, work on your NAPAs, identify the vulnerabilities by sectors, right? So for government of Samoa, our NAPA, we were able to identify what are the key sectors that will be impacted by climate change, and then look deeper into those sectors, like how or what resources do we need to adapt or prepare these sectors. So I can give you a quick example. For Samoa's NAPAs, one of the things we identified tourism. And remember, it was a big thing too, because at the time, all the different sectors weren't talking climate change, right? But what we were learning, that climate change affects everything. So tourism was one sector that was very important to Samoa, because it helps with our GDP and our economy. And so we kind of like did projections of how a cyclone will affect the beaches or the cultural. So we looked at all those aspects, and then we developed project profiles and then prioritized them. And so what happened was, with the NAPA process, the government of Samoa, they were able to seek funding to address those different sectors priority. Not all of them, but we kind of like prioritize. So that was one project.
Are there any differences in the work given in one nation that lies in the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean?
I think there are, right? There are differences and there are also similarities. I think that's true anywhere. I mean, I'm sure if you're talking to someone across a different place, there's always similarities. So, the lived experiences. So I can say there's differences, but there's also a lot of similarities, which is why the exchange of knowledge and sharing of information and stories is very important, because we all learned together and especially at that time, we were all fighting the same fight, finding telling the developed countries to stop climate change, to stop your development, your emissions. That was, not only that, but we were also advocating we need resources to help us keep up with the effects of climate change.
The sustainability in Silicon Valley different from sustainability in the Pacific?
I can definitely say it's very different because very different places, different lifestyles, right? Here, when you talk about sustainability, a lot of the sustainability work focuses on the companies that are trying to, change their behaviors, change their operation to be more sustainable. For us in the islands, it's a whole different environment, different issues. A lot of our issues, we are concerned about, how to get clean water to people's homes, how to manage our waste. We don't have the technology to do that. How we deal with increase of population density, land issues. So we have those kind of issues that we deal with. But here, as you can see, there's a lot of pollution. There's, how companies are operating, and a lot of the time here right now, if you listen to the sustainability, how they are addressing those issues, they talk about how to reduce their footprint, how to reduce emissions through. Now you see a lot of solar panels installed on like company buildings or even government offices. They have the resources to do that. Like in Samoa, for example, very different technology. We don't have the technology that they have here. We're kind of like behind. So very different experiences and different issues. But at the same time, we are all dealing with trying to address climate change. And that's something that I see here. I'm kind of very proud to be in California, where it's a very important issue that we're tackling here. And when you go to the islands, it's the same too, right? We're feeling the impact. And so a lot of the work there is also trying to minimize the impact. So again, similarities, but also differences.
What work do you wish to do or continue doing in the future, both internationally and in the States?
I don't know about internationally. I mean, a lot of my work now focuses here in the States. I think there's a lot of, the need is here. And that's where my focus is. So I started, I founded community-based organizations that works directly with community leaders, not only elevate their voices, but also build capacity to plan for climate change. And a lot of my work so far has been focused in San Mateo County. But this year we have started to do some work in Santa Clara County, and we're looking to expand our capacity to serve both counties. So I see there's a lot of need here, and I like to focus to the here and now. Internationally, I think the only thing I can offer or I can contribute is that taking the experience and the successes or the lessons learned from here and share it with other countries or other regions where they're trying to deal with their work too. But I think everybody else so far with experiences, they can there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of successes, but with the uncertainties that come with climate change, we still have to be prepared for the unknown. And I always believe that tackling climate change is not a one person's job. It should be everybody else working together to address, because everything in every sector is impacted.
And then last question of the day is, what action steps do you think we Pacific Islanders need to take for environmental health?
I think, as we have seen with COVID, right? I think us Pacific Islanders were always that vulnerable population to when it comes to health. And I think it's, I'm not an expert, but from the data I've seen, we're like highly vulnerable because of our lifestyle. And so the same thing, with climate change as well. See, with climate change, it adds a burden, right? So if we are not healthy, or if we are not, prepared, the impacts of climate change can, again, just like COVID, right? It can come on us and it affects our health. So what should we do to be prepared? I think one important thing is to understand how climate change impacts our health. And so talk about, understand what's around you in the air. I mean, a lot of it right now with, recent studies that we were involved in, air pollution in our homes, it's higher and dangerous than the outside air. So that's something that we should also, just be mindful and learn about these impacts, like heat waves. Do we know how to be safe when a heat wave occurs? Do we know what to do? Do you know where the cooling centers are? Do we have community members who need support, right? Our elderly, are we taking care of them? Do we know how to reach them? So all these different things matters when it comes to responding to health impacts from climate change. And another thing that's very important, which is something that I know that us Pacific Islanders have, is our network, right? We're family-oriented people. We take care of our loved ones, and we take care of our neighbors, and we gather together, and so use those opportunities to talk about these issues, use those opportunities to plan, and then when something happens, we know what to do, who to call, where to go. So those are kind of like the preparations that we need to be mindful and be prepared for.
Thank you for taking time out of your day to come do an interview with us about environmental justice. And I want to thank everyone out there for joining us. And I'm Tiane. Look out for our second episode. We'll be back at you again.